It started with rain that felt like it was washing something away. Not dirt, not dust, something heavier, something that had been sitting between us for too long. We had been meaning to take that trip for months, just the two of us. No deadlines, no meetings, no noise. The Volkswagen had been sitting in the garage for almost a year, the smell of old leather and oil clinging to it like memory. When the forecast called for a week of off and on rain across the Appalachians, we said screw it. Let's go anyway. We'd camped through worse. We always told ourselves we were good at this, that the road was where we remembered how to breathe again. But sometimes when you keep running to the same places looking for peace, you start realizing it's not the place that's broken. By the time we crossed into the mountains, the roads were slick and shining under low clouds. The air smelled like pine and diesel, and the fog came in soft waves that clung to the asphalt. Every few miles we passed a house with sagging porches and hand-painted signs warning about flash floods. In a small diner in a town that looked like it had been asleep since 1975, a woman behind the counter wiped her hands on a rag and asked where we were headed. Up past Miller Creek, I said. There's a campground up that way. We've been before. She paused, not in a dramatic way, just the kind of pause that lets silence decide what to do next. After all that rain? She asked. I nodded. She looked out the window. You might want to wait a night or two. That ground don't drain right up there. Folks get stuck easy. My wife smiled politely, thanked her, and we paid. The woman didn't press. As we left, she just said, almost as if to herself, locals don't stay after rain. I remember the way the door's bell jingled when we left, sharp, lonely, too bright for how gray the sky was. We reached the campsite by late afternoon. The air had that heavy stillness that comes after a storm, birds quiet, trees dripping, the mud a dark mirror under our boots. The Westphalia groaned as it rolled over ruts and puddles, the engine coughing once before we parked beside the tree line. It wasn't much of a campground, just a few faded picnic tables and a rusted fire ring, the kind of place where you could almost forget the world existed, which was the point, I guess. We set up fast, canopy, folding chairs, a small propane stove. The clouds hung low and torn, their undersides catching the weak evening light. When the wind shifted, it carried the smell of wet earth and cedar. For a while, it was peaceful. We made coffee, watched the fog move like breath across the treetops. My wife took pictures, she always did, framing the mist, the van, the empty tables. Looks like something out of a postcard, she said. Or a warning, I half joked. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. By dusk, the road down had already started to disappear under the fog. It came in so thick it looked solid, like we could step into it and vanish. The forest grew quiet again. No frogs, no crickets, no wind, just the soft hiss of moisture in the air. We ate inside the van, listening to the patter of leftover drizzle on the metal roof. That's when she brought it up again. The same old argument, the one we'd promised to leave behind on this trip. About how I'd been gone too much, working too late, always distracted. I told her I'd been trying, that this trip was proof. She said, trying isn't the same as being here. I wanted to say something sharp back, but the words didn't come. Outside, a branch cracked, sharp and sudden. We both froze. The woods had that kind of stillness that made every small sound feel amplified. The drip of water, the sigh of the van as it cooled. Then, nothing. She looked at me, her eyes wide but calm. Deer? Probably, I said. But I didn't believe it. The sound had been too deliberate. The night deepened fast. The fog thickened until we couldn't even see the tree line from the windows. The air inside the van felt heavy, humid, claustrophobic. Around midnight, the rain started again, slow, steady, almost hypnotic. I lay awake, listening to it tap against the roof. My wife was asleep beside me, her breathing soft, uneven. That's when I noticed it. A faint light through the fog, not white like a flashlight, more like a dull yellow, swinging slightly, the way an old lantern would. It moved between the trees, stopped, moved again. I sat up, pressing my hand against the glass. The condensation smeared under my palm. The light was closer now, still faint, still moving. Hey, I whispered. She stirred, half asleep. What is it? Someone's out there. She turned, squinting through the fog, but by the time she looked, the light was gone. Just the outline of the forest, thick and shapeless. We waited a minute, two. Nothing. Probably another camper, she murmured, already drifting back to sleep. But I knew there weren't any others. We hadn't seen a single soul since we left the main road. I told myself I was just tired, that the fog was playing tricks on the eyes. But part of me, that small, primitive part that still listens to old fears, kept whispering that something wasn't right. When I woke again, it was morning, or something like it. The fog hadn't lifted. It was thicker, if anything, swallowing the light and muting every sound. I stepped outside, boots sinking into the mud. The van was splattered with streaks of dirt and leaves from the storm, but something else caught my eye. Footprints. Not ours. We'd worn hiking boots, deep tread. These were bare, smaller, pressed unevenly into the mud near the door. There were only two, side by side, facing the van. I followed them a few steps before they just ended. Not faded, ended, like they'd been wiped clean beyond that point. The air had a strange smell, like wet ash or something burned long ago but still faintly there. I couldn't shake the sense that the forest was watching. When I turned back, my wife was standing in the doorway of the van, holding her camera. "Did you take these last night?" I asked. She shook her head. "What?" "The pictures of someone walking around." She frowned. "What are you talking about?" I told her about the light, the footprints. Her expression shifted from confusion to unease. Then she looked past me, into the fog. "I don't remember hearing anything," she said quietly. The silence that followed felt thick enough to choke on. We decided to leave early, but when I tried to back the van out, the tires spun uselessly in the mud. The engine growled, the whole frame shuddering. The more I pressed, the deeper we sank. By noon, the fog began to thin just enough for us to see beyond the clearing, and that's when we realized it. The forest didn't look the same. The ridges were wrong. The slope of the hills, the angle of the trees, everything had shifted. The road that had led in was gone, replaced by a line of thick underbrush. We walked in circles for hours, trying to find the old path. The compass on my phone spun aimlessly, never settling. At some point, I stopped and said, almost to myself, "This isn't the same place." She didn't answer, just looked around, her hand trembling slightly as she gripped the camera. That's when we heard it. The softest sound, almost a whisper, carried through the trees. "You stayed too long." It was a whisper so faint that for a moment I thought the forest itself had exhaled. "You stayed too long." My wife froze beside me. The sound came again. Not loud, not clear, just enough to tighten every muscle in my body. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. She shook her head too quickly. "No, it was the wind." But her voice trembled in a way that told me she had heard it too. We stood there, the fog curling around us, swallowing our outlines. My heart thudded, the air felt thick with moisture and unease. The forest smelled different now, sharper, sour, like moss and something metallic underneath. The same place, but stripped of its warmth. I tried to laugh it off, but the sound caught in my throat. "Guess we really did stay too long." She didn't laugh. She just said quietly, "I want to go home." We packed what we could, though there wasn't much point. The van was still stuck, buried deep in mud that looked almost black. I tried again, engine roaring, wheels spinning, mud splattering the side windows. Nothing. She stood outside, arms crossed, camera dangling loosely from her wrist. Her face was pale, lips pressed tight. I could tell she was trying not to panic. "Maybe there's another road," she said. "There isn't. I walked it this morning. It's gone." Roads don't just disappear. I wanted to say neither do footprints, but I didn't. Instead, I turned off the engine, opened the door, and stepped into the fog again. My boots sank deep with every step. The trees leaned inward, branches heavy with moisture, leaves dripping in slow rhythm, drip, 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 like a clock marking time wrong. We started walking, just to move, to find higher ground, to prove the world hadn't folded in on itself. But every direction led deeper into sameness. The same fallen log, the same moss-covered rock. It felt like we were walking in circles, even though the compass said we weren't moving at all. At some point, I stopped to catch my breath. The fog swirled around her silhouette, making her seem half there, half drawn in chalk. "You're sure this is the way we came?" she asked. "I don't know anymore." That was the moment it started to fracture, not just the forest, but something between us. She looked at me with that old resentment, the one from the city, the one that had followed us here even though we swore we'd leave it behind. "You didn't check the forecast," she said suddenly. "You just wanted to go. You always do this. You decide, and I follow." Her voice cracked. "You think because we've done this 100 times, you'll always know the way back." It wasn't an accusation. It was a confession. I wanted to argue, to tell her this wasn't my fault, that the forest had changed, but the truth was, part of me had wanted to come here to prove I could still fix things, to prove I still had control. But standing there, surrounded by fog so thick I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead, I realized control was the first thing I'd lost. The day dragged into a dull gray blur. Hunger settled in, heavy and confusing. We rationed what food we had, but appetite felt wrong in a place like that. At dusk, we made a small fire using damp branches that hissed and spat. The smoke barely rose. It clung low to the ground, as if even it couldn't find a way out. I stared into the flames until shapes started forming in them, faces, or the suggestion of faces, shifting in the orange light. Every gust of wind carried whispers I couldn't quite place. Sometimes it sounded like my name, sometimes hers. She sat across from me, wrapped in a blanket, eyes red from tears she hadn't wanted me to see. When I asked if she was okay, she said, "You hear it too, don't you?" I didn't answer, because the truth was I did. It wasn't words, not exactly. Just the faint suggestion of human rhythm. The way silence folds in on itself when someone's nearby but not speaking. That subtle difference between alone and not alone. Later that night, I woke to the sound of knocking. 3 slow knocks. Then silence. Then 3 more. It was coming from the side of the van. I sat up, breath held, listening. My wife stirred, eyes opening just enough to whisper, "What is it?" "Stay quiet." Another knock, louder this time, closer to the back window. I reached for the flashlight, clicked it on, and aimed it toward the sound, but the beam hit nothing but fog and the glisten of wet trees. Then, faintly, almost drowned by the rain, "You stayed too long." I froze. The voice was close now, maybe 10 feet away. A man's voice, low and rough, as if speaking through water. My wife's hand found mine, trembling. "Who's there?" she called out before I could stop her. No answer. Just the fog moving, pressing against the glass like something breathing. And then, one more knock. This one soft, almost gentle, right on the window beside her head. She screamed. I threw the door open, the flashlight shaking in my hand. The light cut through the mist. For a second, I saw movement, something slipping behind the trees. A figure, or maybe just a shadow. I ran toward it. I don't even know why. Instinct, maybe. Anger. Fear. All of it. The mud sucked at my boots, the air colder now, almost metallic against my teeth. "Hey!" I shouted. "Who's out there?" The only answer was the echo of my own voice, swallowed almost instantly by the fog. When I turned back, I could barely see the van's headlights through the mist. The sound of her crying reached me before the sight of her did. By dawn, the fog began to thin, just barely, enough to see a stretch of land beyond the clearing. A sliver of road. We didn't talk. We just packed what we could carry and pushed the van until the tires caught. It lurched forward, growling, wheels spraying mud like blood. For a moment, I thought we were moving in the wrong direction. But the trees began to thin, the sky opening above us. The road, or something like it, appeared under our tires. Neither of us looked back. We drove for what felt like hours before we saw the first sign of anything. A small gas station, old and flickering, sitting alone at a crossroads. When I stepped inside, the air smelled of motor oil and coffee that had burned too long. The man behind the counter looked up, nodding once. "Storm got you, huh?" "Yeah," I said, my voice hoarse. "Got stuck up near Miller Creek." He frowned. "That road's been closed since last year, washed out after the floods." I stared at him. "No, we drove up there yesterday." He shook his head slowly. Ain't no one been up that way since the storm in March. Behind me, my wife dropped something, her camera, clattering against the counter. The old man looked at her, then at me. "You two look like you've seen a ghost," he said softly. I wanted to tell him it wasn't a ghost, that it was worse, something real, something that lived in the edges of the map where roads washed away and memory didn't quite hold shape. But all I could say was, we stayed too long. We never spoke about it again. Not to each other, not to anyone. Back in the city, everything looked too sharp, too loud. Some nights I wake up to rain hitting the window, and for a moment I swear I hear it again. That soft knocking, 3 times, slow and deliberate. Sometimes she dreams too. I know because I see her flinch in her sleep, whispering something I can't make out. We tell ourselves it's over, that what happened in those woods was just weather, exhaustion, bad luck. But when it rains, really rains, I still hear her voice from that night, soft and shaking, asking, "Do you think we ever really left?" And I never have the courage to answer, because somewhere, deep down, I know the locals were right. You don't stay after rain, not because you can't, but because something out there doesn't want you to leave. My name's Eli Turner, and I've been traveling alone for a while now. Not the kind of travel people post about. No sunsets over canyons or drone shots of pristine lakes. Mine's quieter. I moved through the country with an old Volkswagen Westphalia, the kind that smells like old fabric and gasoline when the sun hits it. I sleep wherever there's enough flat ground to park and enough silence to record. I record nature sounds. That's my thing. I run a small podcast, nothing fancy, called Hollow Earth Audio. People listen to fall asleep, to feel calm, or maybe to imagine they're somewhere else for a while. That's what I used to want too. To be somewhere else, anywhere, but inside my own head. Last fall, I took a route that runs along a stretch of the Appalachian Trail, deep into the Blue Ridge foothills. I wanted to capture late autumn sounds before winter swallowed everything, the kind of ambient mix you only get when the leaves have mostly fallen, and the forest sounds thinner, more fragile. It was early November, and the air already carried that dry, metallic cold. You can smell it before the frost even sets in. The scent of dying leaves, sap turned bitter, the faint hint of wood smoke drifting up from cabins you can't see. By the time I rolled into a small town called Marrow Ridge, the sun was dipping behind the mountains. I stopped at a diner for coffee and directions. The waitress was young, early 20s maybe, with tired eyes and a cross necklace that kept glinting in the neon light. When I told her I was camping near the trail, she hesitated, then said, open quote, "You'll hear a lot of things up there. It's just the woods, but they carry sound weird. Sometimes you can hear your own echo when you're not even talking." Close quote. I laughed politely. But the way she said it, not joking, not warning, just matter of fact, left something behind in me. Like she wasn't telling me to be careful, just preparing me for something I wouldn't understand until it was too late. That night I drove another 40 minutes up the ridge. The Westphalia's headlights cut through trees that seemed to close in tighter the higher I went. I passed only one other car, a rusty pickup parked at an overlook, engine off, no one inside that I could see. When I finally found a spot flat enough to park, it was already full dark. No campground sign, no picnic tables, just a clearing near a gravel service road. I checked my map. It was close enough to the trailhead to pick up natural sound, but far enough from anyone else. Perfect. The air was absolutely still. No crickets, no wind, just the sound of my own boots crunching frost-stiffened leaves. I set up my mic rig about 30 feet from the van, a stereo field recorder with 2 condensers pointed toward the tree line. I left it running on a timer while I brewed coffee on my camp stove. The flame hissed loud in the silence. When you record nature for long enough, you start noticing absence, the way silence behaves. It's not empty. It has texture, weight. That night, it pressed down like a blanket that was too heavy. I told myself it was the altitude, the air density, but something about it felt contained, like the woods were holding their breath. I remember sitting in the front seat, wrapped in my old army jacket, sipping instant coffee, watching the steam curl up against the windshield. I kept the radio off. There was something oddly comforting about how analog everything was. The ticking of the van's cooling engine, the tape wheel in the recorder turning, the faint smell of propane. Around midnight, I climbed into the back to sleep. The insulation in those old Volkswagens isn't great, so the cold crept in fast. I pulled my sleeping bag tight, listened for any sign of movement outside, a raccoon, a branch falling, anything, but the silence stayed total. I must have drifted off sometime after one. When I woke, it was still dark. Early morning, maybe 4 or 5. For a second, I didn't know what pulled me from sleep. Then I realized it wasn't a sound, but the absence of one. The wind had picked up sometime during the night, and now it had stopped again, completely. I lay still, listening. And then, faintly, I heard it. Not outside, not inside, somewhere in between. A slow, uneven rhythm like someone walking around the van. The steps were light but deliberate. Crunch, pause, crunch. I froze. My first thought was animal. Deer, maybe, or someone hiking early, but the pacing was wrong, too measured. I slid quietly out of my sleeping bag and peeked toward the window. Nothing but blackness and the faint outline of trees. Then came another sound. Softer, closer. Breathing. Not heavy or strained, just slow, steady, like someone standing still just beyond the glass. I told myself it was the wind again, tricking my ears. The human brain loves patterns, even in randomness. I tried to rationalize it, to find logic in the noise. But when I heard the slight creak of gravel near the back bumper, my stomach turned to ice. That was no trick of the wind. I stayed awake until the first hint of light crept over the ridge. When I finally stepped outside, my breath fogged in the cold. The ground was undisturbed. No footprints, no signs of anyone having been there. The forest looked completely still, innocent almost, as if mocking the fear that had kept me rigid all night. But something was off. My microphone, the one I'd left on the tripod near the tree line, was gone. The stand was still there, knocked slightly askew, but the mic itself and the cable were missing. At first, I thought maybe an animal had dragged it off, but when I followed the cable trail, it just ended, cleanly, as if it had been unplugged. Back in the van, I checked the recorder. The little red light was still blinking. It had been running all night. I hesitated before hitting playback. Some part of me didn't want to know, but curiosity, or maybe denial, won out. The first few hours were just ambient night sounds. Wind shifting through trees, faint groans of branches, occasional scurrying. Then came the period where I'd been asleep, and for a long time, there was nothing. Until there was. A faint rustle, then another. Then, unmistakably, footsteps. They circled the mic, slow and irregular, pausing between steps as if listening for something. The stereo field shifted slightly with each one, left to right, like whoever, whatever it was, kept turning its head. Then came the breathing, close enough that I could hear the moisture in it, a human rhythm, inhale, exhale, right up against the microphone grill. And then a soft tap, like a fingernail on metal. Once, twice, then silence. The recording went on for another 2 hours after that, but no other sounds followed. I sat there for a long time, just listening to that segment over and over, trying to convince myself it was me, that I'd somehow gotten up in my sleep, walked around, breathed into my own mic, then forgotten. But the footsteps, they came after the sound of me zipping up the sleeping bag. The breathing wasn't mine. By the time I realized I'd been sitting motionless for nearly an hour, the sun was already burning through the morning mist. I packed up fast, faster than usual, and started the van. The engine coughed twice before catching, that old familiar sputter that used to make me smile. Now it just sounded fragile, uncertain. As I pulled onto the road, I glanced at the rearview mirror. For a split second, I thought I saw something, a flicker of movement between the trees, pale against the dark trunks. But when I blinked, it was gone. Maybe a trick of light, maybe not. I drove without stopping for nearly 3 hours. But later, when I finally pulled into another rest area to clear my head, I noticed something strange. The recorder, the one that had kept running all night, was still rolling when I'd turned off the van. I hadn't stopped it. And even though the mic was gone, the waveform on the screen still showed sound being captured. I remember staring at that tiny waveform on the screen, the way it pulsed softly, irregularly, as if the recorder was still alive, breathing on its own. For a long time, I couldn't bring myself to hit play. It was late morning by then. The rest stop was empty, just a cracked asphalt lot overlooking a bend in the highway. The only sound was the faint hum of passing trucks miles away and the occasional creak from the van's suspension as it cooled. I finally pressed play. At first, nothing, just static and the low hiss of wind interference. But beneath it, there was something else. A tone. So faint I thought it was my ears ringing. A hollow, almost rhythmic resonance, repeating every few seconds, boom, boom. It wasn't mechanical. Not the van. Not feedback either. It sounded natural, like someone cupping their hands and blowing over the mouth of a bottle. The sound grew louder as the minutes passed, until I realized it wasn't looping, it was moving, like something slowly approaching the microphone that no longer existed. That was the moment I turned it off. I told myself I was just exhausted, that I'd gone too long without real sleep, too much caffeine, too many nights listening to my own recordings for patterns that weren't there. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. There's something about sound. Once you've worked with it long enough, you learn how it moves through space. You learn to tell direction, distance, even texture. And what I'd heard wasn't random noise. It had intent. I tried to shake it off and keep driving. The plan was to head east, closer to the state line, maybe spend the night near a populated campground where I could see other people, hear other voices. But the longer I drove, the more something began to nag at me. A faint vibration under the dashboard, the kind you feel more than hear. The radio was off, the engine steady, but somewhere deep inside the metal, something was humming. I rolled down the window. The sound didn't change. I reached under the glove compartment, thinking maybe a loose part was rattling. My fingers brushed against the casing of the recorder. I tucked it there earlier, still running. When I pulled it out, the humming grew louder, not through the speaker, but from the device itself. The plastic was faintly warm, and that tone, that same hollow boom, boom, was pulsing softly inside it, like a heartbeat. By afternoon, clouds had rolled in, dulling the sky to a colorless gray. I found a gas station off Route 220 and parked near the edge of the lot. The attendant, an older man with a long beard and oil-stained hands, came out to fill the tank. He looked at the van, then at me. Open quote, "Haven't seen one of these old Westies in years," he said. "You camping around here?" Close quote. I nodded. "Yeah, up near Merrill Ridge last night." The man's face shifted slightly, not alarmed, just aware. He wiped his hands on a rag, then leaned in a little closer. Open quote, "You go up there alone?" Close quote. "Yeah," he hesitated. "A lot of folks don't stay long up that way. Sound travels strange through those hollers. Echoes bounce around like they're alive." I almost told him about the recording, about the footsteps and the breathing and the tone that shouldn't exist. But something stopped me. I didn't want to say it out loud. Saying it would make it real. So I just paid for the gas, nodded, and drove on. That night, I parked near a state-maintained campground. Nothing fancy. A few picnic tables, a fire ring, and a narrow creek running along the far edge. There were 2 other RVs down the hill, both with their porch lights on. It felt safer. I cooked a quick dinner, canned beans, bread, instant coffee again, and tried to listen to the forest the way I used to, for rhythm, for music, for patterns that made sense, but all I could hear was absence. Even the creek sounded wrong, its trickle slightly out of sync with itself, like a recording played back at the wrong speed. As the sun disappeared, the other campers' lights went out one by one until only mine remained. I climbed into the back, pulled the curtains, and sat in the dim glow of my lantern. The recorder was still sitting on the counter. I'd left it running all day, partly because I didn't want to touch it again. But now, watching it in the lantern light, I realized something else. The battery indicator hadn't moved. After 24 hours of recording, It should have been dead. I stared at it until my eyes blurred, then finally forced myself to stop looking. I switched off the lantern, zipped up my sleeping bag, and tried to sleep. I must have dozed off, because the next thing I remember is waking to a faint clicking sound. It took me a second to realize it was coming from inside the van. Click, pause, click, click, pause. At first, I thought it was the stove cooling, or maybe the lantern contracting in the cold. But when I listened closer, I realized it was too regular, too deliberate. The sound was coming from the counter, from the recorder. The small green light was flickering rapidly, as if it were receiving a signal. Then the clicking stopped, and a voice, or something close to one, came through the speaker. Faint, distant, distorted by static. Open quote, Eli. Close quote. My whole body went cold. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even clear. But it said my name. Once, slowly, then again, drawn out like it was learning how to shape the word. Open quote, Eli. Close quote. I lunged forward and switched it off. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. The van fell into silence again, but I could still hear it, faintly, beneath everything else. That same hollow tone, pulsing in the air like an echo without a source. By morning, I'd made up my mind to leave. Whatever was happening, glitch, interference, exhaustion, I didn't care anymore. I just wanted to get out of those mountains. I packed everything in record time, barely touching the recorder except to throw it into the glove compartment. The road out wound through dense forest, the kind that swallows light even at midday. My eyes kept flicking to the mirrors, half expecting to see someone walking along the shoulder. When I finally hit a main road again, I felt my chest unclench for the first time in days. Civilization, traffic, signage, radio signals, all of it felt like safety. I stopped at a diner on the outskirts of a small town called Nelson Gap, ordered eggs and coffee, tried to convince myself that everything was fine. Halfway through my meal, a man in a weathered park ranger uniform came in. He looked around, spotted me by the window, and nodded politely before sitting a few stools away at the counter. After a few minutes, he turned toward me. Open quote, "You camping up the ridge?" Close quote. I hesitated, then nodded. Was, near Merrow Ridge. He raised his eyebrows slightly. Not many go that far up this time of year. I was just recording nature sounds, I said, for a podcast. He smiled faintly, then said, open quote, "You pick up anything interesting?" Close quote. Something in his tone, casual but probing, made my stomach tighten. I managed a small laugh. Maybe too interesting. The ranger studied me for a moment, then nodded. Open quote, "Sound plays tricks out there. The valleys are full of hollows and caves. They carry noise like tunnels. Folks think they hear things following them. Echoes don't die out fast. They just keep traveling until they come back from a different direction." Close quote. He took a sip of his coffee, then added quietly, open quote, "Sometimes they don't come back empty," close quote. I didn't ask what he meant. I just finished my meal, paid the bill, and left. Back in the van, I sat there for a long time before starting the engine. The glove compartment was still closed, but I could hear something faint from inside. A steady pulse, almost too low to notice unless you were listening for it. I told myself I'd throw it away when I got home, that I'd delete the files, wipe the memory, pretend it was just another bad night alone in the woods. But when I finally reached over to open the compartment, the pulsing stopped. I pulled the recorder out. The screen was blank. No light, no battery indicator, no signal. Dead. And yet, when I held it to my ear, I swear I could still hear it. That hollow sound, faint and steady, somewhere deep inside. I drove for hours after that, not toward home, not toward anywhere in particular, just moving. The road unwound endlessly in front of me, a gray ribbon through an empty landscape of bare trees and skeletal ridges. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't dare. Every few miles, I'd catch myself glancing at the recorder sitting on the passenger seat. It was completely dead, or at least looked that way. No light, no display. But the longer it sat there, the more I felt like it was watching me, the way an unplugged television still reflects your face in its black screen. By late afternoon, fog began to settle over the valley. It crept low and thin across the asphalt, swirling in pale ribbons that seemed to twist away from the van as I passed. I found a small turnout near a creek and pulled over. My head felt heavy, my thoughts static choked. I stepped outside to clear my mind. The air was cold enough to sting. The fog muted everything. The world felt sealed in cotton. Even the creek's murmur was dulled, muffled to a low whisper. That's when I noticed something strange. The sound of the water wasn't constant. It rose and fell in rhythm, not random, not natural. It almost matched the tone I'd heard on the recorder. A slow, hollow boom, boom, boom. Not quite in sync with my heartbeat, but close enough that my chest started to ache with each pulse. I turned back toward the van, but for a moment I couldn't see it. The fog had thickened, swallowing everything beyond a few feet. My pulse spiked. I took a step forward and froze. Somewhere behind me, deep in the mist, gravel shifted, just once, then silence. "Hello?" I called, my voice unnaturally loud in the still air. No response. I stood there, waiting, listening. Then, faintly, like an echo from far off, came a sound that nearly made my knees buckle. Breathing. Slow, steady, human. And underneath it, that hollow tone again. I bolted for the van. I slammed the door, locked it, and sat there gripping the steering wheel until my hands stopped shaking. The fog pressed up against the glass, thick enough now that I couldn't even see the trees on the other side of the creek. Inside the van, everything was silent except for the faint ticking of the cooling engine. I could feel my pulse in my throat. I needed to know what was happening. Needed to make sense of it. So I reached for the recorder. The screen flickered on. Just for a second, but long enough for me to see the timestamp, live recording. It shouldn't have been possible. The mic was gone. The battery was dead. And yet the waveform was moving, steady, pulsing, like something was being captured right now. I turned up the volume, static. Then, beneath it, something faint, scraping, a slow drag of something rough against metal. Then the breathing again, closer this time, more distinct. And then a voice, low and rasped, barely a whisper. Open quote, "You left the door open." Close quote. I dropped the recorder. It hit the floor with a hollow clack, the sound echoing unnaturally loud inside the van. Every instinct screamed at me to start the engine and drive. But I couldn't move. I just sat there, staring at the windshield, waiting for something, anything to appear out of the fog. Nothing did. Finally, I forced myself to breathe, to move, to act. I reached down, picked up the recorder, and shoved it into the glove compartment, slamming it shut. The moment the latch clicked, the fog outside seemed to shift, not clearing, but lifting, like a curtain rising. For a few seconds, I saw the faint outlines of trees again, the dark smear of the road beyond. I started the engine and drove. Night fell fast. By the time I hit the highway, I could barely keep my eyes open. I hadn't slept properly in days. I kept telling myself that everything I'd heard was just the product of exhaustion, of isolation, of being too deep in my own head. That's the danger of living alone on the road. The silence starts to talk back. But there was something else gnawing at me, something I couldn't rationalize away. The voice that said, in my name. It hadn't sounded angry. It hadn't even sounded human in the way you expect, full of malice or hunger. It had sounded curious, like it didn't understand the word it was speaking, but wanted to. I reached a small town called Ashford Hollow around midnight and decided I couldn't drive any further. There was a public campground just outside the limits, mostly empty this time of year. I parked beneath a cluster of tall pines and killed the engine. For a while, I just sat there, headlights off, letting my eyes adjust to the dark. The air smelled like damp bark and distant rain. I told myself I wouldn't touch the recorder again, that I'd throw it into the creek in the morning, let it sink and rot. But the thought of leaving it there, still running, still recording that impossible tone, made my stomach twist. So I did the opposite of what any rational person would do. I opened the glove compartment and pulled it out. It was still dark. No lights, no hum, just a cold hunk of plastic and metal. I turned it over in my hands, thumb brushing against the power switch. For a long time, I hesitated. Then I pressed it. Nothing. I pressed again. The screen blinked on. This time there was no static, no tone, just a simple waveform slowly moving across the display, steady, even, almost peaceful. Then I noticed the timestamp. It wasn't current. It was from the night in Merrow Ridge. The file name read Eli002 Play. It was already playing. I stared at it, confused. I hadn't pressed play, and then through the tiny speaker I heard it, my own voice. Open quote, testing, 1, 2, close quote. It was my recording from that night, me setting up the mic before bed. But as it continued, something changed. There were sounds I didn't remember making, faint movements inside the van, the soft shift of fabric, the grasp of breath. Then another voice, my voice again, but not quite right. Open quote, don't close your eyes, close quote. The words came out low, distorted by the tape, but unmistakably mine. The air in the van turned heavy, claustrophobic. I hit stop, but it didn't respond. I tried again. Nothing. The waveform kept moving, the voice repeating, louder now, overlapping itself. Open quote. Don't close your eyes. Don't close your eyes. Close quote. I grabbed it and yanked the batteries out. The screen died instantly. The voice stopped. Silence. I sat there, shaking, the dead recorder clutched in my hands. After a while, I opened the door and stepped outside. The night air hit me like ice water. The trees loomed silent and still, their branches black against the faint glow of the sky. I walked down to the edge of the creek that bordered the campground. The water was shallow, rippling softly over smooth stones. I held the recorder above it, ready to let go, and then I hesitated. Because from the speaker grill came one last sound, a breath, long, slow, and unmistakably human. I dropped it. The recorder hit the water with a dull splash, sank, and disappeared into the current. For a moment, I thought I heard the tone again, muffled through the water, that same hollow resonance fading slowly downstream until it was gone. I left the mountains the next morning. I didn't stop, didn't look back. It's been months now. I haven't camped since. The Westphalia sits behind my apartment building, gathering dust. I tell myself I'll sell it, but I never do. Maybe part of me can't let go, or maybe part of me's still out there wandering the ridge, caught in that sound that never stops moving. Sometimes when I'm trying to sleep, I think I hear it again. Not loud, not clear, just faint, somewhere under the hum of the city, in the pipes, in the wind that's through the cracks of old windows. A hollow pulse. Boom, boom. And on the nights when I can't stand it anymore, I press my ear to the wall and whisper to the dark just to see if anything answers. So far, it hasn't. But sometimes, I swear I hear breathing. I don't know why I stopped at Echo Ridge that night. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was instinct, or something pretending to be instinct. All I know is, when I saw that weathered wooden sign swinging by the roadside, Echo Ridge RV Park, peaceful isolation, family-owned since 1972, I felt a kind of pull, the kind that makes no sound but still hums inside your bones. I'd been driving for hours like my old Volkswagen Westphalia, humming like an old friend trying to stay awake with me. I'd left Denver that morning, planning to push east toward Kansas, maybe all the way to Missouri if my back didn't give out. But around dusk, the horizon turned into a bruise, violet clouds sagging low, light bleeding out faster than it should have. The highway thinned, then disappeared into two narrow lanes framed by skeletal pines. No other cars, no cell signal, just the dull rhythm of tires on cracked asphalt and the soft static of a dying radio station. When I saw that sign, it felt like a mercy. Peaceful isolation, it promised. At that point in my life, peace was a currency I'd been bankrupt on for years. I turned in. The gravel road wound uphill, past old fence posts wrapped in ivy, until the trees opened to reveal a clearing. And there it was, Echo Ridge RV Park. Maybe 15 slots in total. A small office shack near the entrance, its windows lit with a yellow glow that made the bugs look like floating ash. Beyond that, rows of parked RVs. Some looked abandoned, coated in pollen and dust. Others had curtains drawn, their porch lights on, but no movement inside. Still, There was something almost nostalgic about it, like those roadside places my father used to take me when I was a kid. He'd park near the woods, light a fire, and tell me stories until I fell asleep to the sound of crickets. But this place, it was too quiet. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was thick, like someone had turned the world's volume down just a little too far. I left the engine running as I stepped out. The air smelled of rain that hadn't yet arrived, wet pine, rust, and something faintly metallic underneath. I walked to the office door. The wood was soft and peeling but the bell above it still jingled when I stepped inside. A man looked up from behind the counter, late 50s maybe, sun-spotted skin, eyes the color of tap water. His name tag read Morris. "Evenin'," he said, his smile polite but practiced. "Just you tonight?" "Yeah," I said, rubbing the back of my neck. "Didn't make it as far as I planned, just looking for a place to crash." He nodded slowly. "We got plenty of space." He slid a guest log across the counter, a real one, made of paper and pen, not a tablet. My reflection in the dusty glass framed his expression, calm, unreadable. I took the pen and started writing. Name Ethan Walsh, 1979 Volkswagen Westphalia. Date October 14th. I paused when I saw it. My name already written, 2 lines above. Same name. Same van, but the date read September 23rd, 3 weeks earlier. I stared at it, my throat tightening. Morris followed my gaze. "Something wrong?" I swallowed. "No," I lied, forcing a small laugh. "Guess someone's got my name." He smiled faintly. "Happens more than you'd think." I didn't believe that, but I didn't want to sound paranoid either. He tore a receipt from a pad and handed me my site number. "Spot 9, near the ridge. Quiet up there. Folks like the view." Outside, the sky had gone black except for the faintest smear of silver behind the clouds. The kind of light that doesn't come from the moon, more like reflection, as if something was shining up from below instead of down from above. I backed the van into the space he'd assigned. Spot 9, on a slight incline overlooking the valley. Below, the rest of the park stretched out like a grid of still lives, vehicles half swallowed by the dark, a single lantern glowing by the office. I killed the engine, let the silence rush back in, and exhaled. For a moment, it really did feel peaceful, the kind of quiet you chase but never catch. I brewed some instant coffee on the small propane stove, pulled out a notebook, and tried to write, something I hadn't done since the divorce. I was supposed to be working on an essay series about traveling alone in middle age, about finding clarity in the wilderness. But I couldn't get past the first line. Every time I lifted my pen, I thought about that name in the guest log. My name. My handwriting. The loop in the H, the slant of the T. It looked exactly like mine. Around midnight, I finally shut off the light. The wind had picked up, soft at first, then stronger, rattling the branches outside. The Westphalia creaked in rhythm with it. I lay there listening, eyes open, tracing the shadow of the curtains with my fingertips. That's when I heard it, a sound that didn't belong. A dull knock. Once. Then again. Not at the door, though, from underneath. It stopped when I moved. Then came again, slower, like something testing the rhythm of my breathing. I told myself it was the van's suspension, maybe a loose panel shifting with the wind. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The sound wasn't mechanical. It was deliberate. I turned on the small reading light, heart thudding against the thin walls. Nothing outside but blackness and the reflection of my own face in the window. "Get a grip," I whispered to myself. Still, I couldn't shake the thought that maybe I wasn't the first me to stay here, that maybe the version who came before had never left. By morning, the world looked normal again, or at least it pretended to. Morris was outside the office sweeping the gravel lot. I walked over, coffee in hand, trying to sound casual. "Hey, you get many travelers through here lately?" He looked up, squinting. "Off-season, just a few regulars." I glanced at the other RVs. Curtains drawn, shades closed tight even in daylight. One of them had condensation on the windows, like someone breathing inside. "Those folks long-term?" I asked. Some just passing through." He said it the way someone says, "Don't ask again." I nodded, pretending to accept it, but something in me was already tightening, that quiet animal sense that knows when it's being watched. That night, It happened again. The knocking. 3 times, evenly spaced. This time I got up, opened the door, flashlight in hand. The air was sharp, cold enough to sting. My breath fogged as I knelt beside the van and shined the light underneath. Nothing. Just gravel and pine needles. But when I stood up, I saw it. A handprint on the glass. Faint. Smudged. The kind of mark left by skin slightly damp from fog. Only it was inside the window. My pulse thudded in my throat. I stepped back, staring. I hadn't touched that window all day. I would have seen it. I wiped it away with my sleeve and climbed back in, locking the doors. The air inside felt different now. Thicker, as if someone else had been breathing it before me. Sleep didn't come easily. When it finally did, it came shallow and restless, filled with half-dreams of movement, of seeing myself through the glass, standing outside my own van, waiting to be let in. When I woke, the morning sun was weak and low. Dew clung to everything. My van's windshield was covered in small streaks, lines drawn by a fingertip, not random, parallel, neat, like tally marks. 7 of them. That was when I decided to check the guest log again. Inside the office, Morris wasn't there, just the logbook sitting open on the counter. I flipped through the pages until I found my entry again, the one from 3 weeks ago. Someone had underlined it, in red. And underneath, written in smaller handwriting I didn't recognize, were 3 words, "Welcome back, Ethan." I remember standing there in that tiny office, staring at those 3 words like they were bleeding through the page. Welcome back, Ethan. The air inside the room was stale, thick with the smell of coffee grounds and mildew. The light from the single window came through warped glass, bending everything in strange ways. Dust drifted like tiny ghosts. And for a moment, I swear I heard something faint. A low hum under the floorboards, like someone whispering in another room just out of earshot. I looked around for Morris, but the office was empty. The chair behind the counter was pushed out slightly, as if he'd stood up halfway through a sentence and never came back. My instinct said leave. But another part of me, the part that had driven hundreds of miles to find peace, said understand it first. So I turned the guest log toward me, flipped back a few more pages. Each entry was written in pen, neat handwriting, dated neatly, week after week. And then I noticed a pattern. Every name that appeared in September also appeared again 3 weeks later, always underlined, always with a note in the margin, welcome back. Some pages had been torn out entirely. Others had faint stains, circles, like something wet had dripped onto them and dried over time. I closed the book carefully and backed away, my hands shaking just enough to make the wooden floor creak beneath me. When I stepped outside, the air felt wrong again, heavier than before. It wasn't hot, but I could feel warmth clinging to me, like the kind you feel when someone stands too close behind you. The other RVs sat quiet and still, lined up like sentinels. I started walking between them, my shoes crunching on gravel. Each one looked lived in but untouched. Folding chairs out front, coffee mugs on small tables. One even had a half-finished crossword puzzle clipped under a magnet on its door. But no sound, no movement, no life. I knocked on the first one, soft at first, then louder. Hello? Anyone there? Nothing. I walked to the next, curtains drawn, but through the thin fabric I could see a faint shape, like someone sitting at a table, hunched slightly forward. I waited. Still nothing. Then, just as I turned to leave, the curtain shifted, not from wind, but from inside. A hand pressed against the fabric, flat and slow, as if tracing something on the other side. I froze. My mouth went dry. Before I could react, the shape withdrew. The curtain fell still again. I wanted to tell myself it was someone half asleep, confused, private. But there was something about that gesture, the deliberateness of it, that made my stomach turn. I backed away slowly, heart pounding, and nearly jumped when I heard Morris's voice behind me. Morning stroll? He was standing by the office steps, holding a broom again. His expression was the same, that calm, unreadable half-smile. Didn't mean to scare you, he said. Folks don't usually wander this early. I swallowed hard. I thought maybe someone needed help, didn't see much movement. He nodded slowly. People keep to themselves here. That's kind of the point, you know. Peaceful isolation. The way he said it made the slogan sound like a threat. I forced a small laugh, trying to read him. You ever get déjà vu around here? He looked at me then, really looked. His eyes were gray, the kind of color that didn't reflect light. Sometimes, he said, but you learn not to fight it. Place like this has a rhythm. It keeps you where you belong. I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't want to know. That afternoon, I packed my things. I was ready to go. I'd seen enough. But when I turned the ignition, the van didn't start. Not even a click. Battery was fine, fuel line intact. I checked twice. The problem wasn't mechanical. The problem was something else. I walked back toward the office to ask for help. Maybe a jump, maybe just directions to the nearest town. But the office was empty again. Only the hum of the vending machine filled the space. On the counter sat the guest log, open to a fresh page. My name was already written, October 15th. Below it, another note, don't fight it this time. My pulse hammered so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. I looked around, out the window, across the gravel lot, and saw that same handprint on my van's window again, the one I'd wiped clean. Only now, there were two. I decided to walk. Just leave the van, get to the main road, find someone, anyone, who could tell me what was happening. The path back toward the highway cut through a narrow stretch of woods. I followed it for 10, maybe 15 minutes before realizing something strange. The path curved subtly, always bending right, looping back toward the ridge. No matter which way I turned, the trees looked the same. At one point, I stopped to mark a trunk with my pocket knife. I walked 5 minutes, maybe more, then found the same mark again, fresh and wet. That's when I heard footsteps, slow, measured, a few yards behind me. I turned, flashlight in hand. Hello? Nothing. Only the sound of wind moving through dry leaves. I started walking again, faster this time. The sound followed, always keeping distance, never closing in, never fading away. I broke into a jog, then a run. The trees blurred, my breath ragged, until suddenly I stumbled into the clearing again, back at Echo Ridge, back where I started. The RVs hadn't moved, but the lights were all on now, every single one. Each window glowed with a soft amber light, as if all the people who hadn't answered before were suddenly awake and watching. My van sat in the same spot, but something about it was wrong. I walked closer, slowly, and saw what it was. The driver's seat was reclined, just slightly, and in that half shadow I could make out a shape sitting there. Still. My heart climbed into my throat. I circled around to the driver's side, hand shaking, and shined the flashlight through the window. It was me. Same clothes, same haircut, same tired look in the eyes. Only those eyes weren't moving. They stared straight ahead, expressionless. I stumbled back, breath catching, my flashlight trembling across the gravel. The thing in the seat didn't move, didn't blink. Then, from behind me, I heard Morris's voice again, calm, almost sympathetic. Sometimes peace just means stop running. I spun around, but he wasn't there. The sound had come from everywhere at once, the office, the woods, the ridge. When I turned back, the van's door was open. Empty. Only the faint sound of breathing left behind, steady, rhythmic, perfectly matching my own. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat outside on the small folding chair, watching the mist roll in from the ridge. Every few minutes, I'd catch movement in my peripheral vision, a flicker in one of the RV windows, a curtain shifting, a silhouette turning away. I started to think maybe that's what this place really was. Not a park, not a business, just a waiting room for people who didn't know when to stop searching for peace. By dawn, I decided to try one last thing. If there was another version of me, a shadow, a remnant, whatever it was, then maybe I could face it. Maybe I could ask it what it wanted. I walked down to the office, the gravel cold under my feet. The door was already open. Inside, the guest log lay waiting on the counter, its pages fluttering slightly in the breeze. My latest entry was still there. But now, underneath it, was one more line, newer, wetter ink. Checked out 6:12 a.m. I looked at my watch. 6:12 exactly, and behind me, from somewhere near the ridge, I heard the van's engine start. The sound of that engine tore through the silence like something waking up that shouldn't have. I froze in the doorway of the office. heart hammering in my chest, listening to the slow, familiar rhythm of the Volkswagen Westfalia, my van, idling just outside. It was a sound I knew better than any other. But what I didn't know was who was behind the wheel. The world outside was gray, the kind of dawn that never quite decides to be morning. A faint mist hung in the air, swallowing the trees, smothering the color out of everything. The RVs stood in neat rows, windows glowing faintly, as if their occupants were awake but refusing to be seen. And there, halfway down the gravel lot, sat my van, engine running, driver's door open. I walked toward it, one step at a time. The gravel crunched louder than it should have, echoing back at me from every direction. It felt like the air itself was tightening, holding its breath. When I reached the van, I looked inside. The driver's seat was empty again, keys still in the ignition, engine purring steady, low, warm. But something was different. The odometer read exactly 3 miles more than when I parked the night before. My breath fogged the window. My own reflection stared back at me, hollow-eyed, disoriented, older somehow. For a moment, I almost thought I saw another face behind mine in the reflection. Faint, watching, patient. I turned off the engine. The moment the key clicked, every light in the park went out. The office, the porch lamps, the small glowing curtains, all of it gone in an instant. The only light left came from the ridge, a dull silver glow bleeding through the trees. It pulsed, slow and steady, like the heartbeat of something buried underground. That's when I heard the first door open. Not mine, someone else's, then another and another. Soft thuds as feet hit gravel, the whisper of fabric. Breathing. I turned. Figures stood outside the other RVs, still silhouettes, pale in the fog, too many to count. They didn't move closer, they just stood there watching, each one facing me. "Hello?" I called out. My voice cracked halfway through. No answer. Then one of them spoke, a woman's voice, hoarse and distant, like a tape played too slow. "You shouldn't have come back." The others began to murmur, their voices rising like wind through dry reeds. Words I couldn't make out, overlapping, building until the sound became a single low vibration that made my teeth ache. I backed away toward the van, fumbling for the door handle. The metal was slick with condensation, almost warm. When I yanked it open, something fluttered out from the seat, a folded piece of paper. I unfolded it with trembling hands. It was a receipt. From Echo Ridge RV Park. Name, Ethan Walsh. Check in September 23rd. Check out September 24th. The signature at the bottom was mine, but the ink wasn't dry. Something shifted then, not in the air, but in me. A kind of clarity, cold and sharp. I remembered the drive 3 weeks ago, the rain, the fatigue, the curve of the highway. And then nothing. A blank stretch, like my mind had been edited, a reel of film cut and spliced. Had I already been here? Had I left? Or had I never left at all? I climbed into the driver's seat. The key turned easily, the engine catching on the first try. The headlights flared to life, cutting through the fog. For a second, I thought I saw the figures vanish, but they hadn't vanished. They'd stepped closer. Their faces were clearer now, each one eerily familiar. One by one, I recognized them. People I'd seen in the guest log. Faces from the photos taped to the bulletin board by the office door. Faces that hadn't aged in the pictures, that not even by a day, and one of them looked exactly like me. He was standing by the ridge, half lit by the silver glow. No expression, just watching. I floored the gas pedal. The van lurched forward, gravel spraying behind me. The figures didn't move. They didn't have to. The fog thickened, swallowing the path ahead. The headlights only reached a few feet before hitting white. But I kept driving. Faster, harder, the engine screaming as the trees blurred. Then, just when I thought I saw the highway's yellow line appear in the distance, the road curved sharply, forcing me to slam the brakes. The van skidded sideways and came to a stop at the edge of the ridge. I was back where I started. Spot 9. The engine died. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel until my hands ached. The mist pressed against the glass like breath. I could still hear the low hum from the ridge, steady, rhythmic, like something breathing under the ground. Then, from the passenger seat, I heard a quiet voice. "You checked out already." I turned slowly. There was someone sitting there, half in shadow, half in morning light. He looked exactly like me. Same stubble, same jacket, same dark circles under the eyes, but his expression was calm, peaceful even. "What is this?" I managed to whisper. He looked at me. No malice, no madness, just a tired kind of understanding. "You kept coming back," he said, "looking for quiet, looking for answers that you thought peace meant stillness. But peace isn't silence, Ethan. It's leaving when you're supposed to." I shook my head. "You're not real." He smiled faintly. "Then why do you keep writing your name?" My eyes darted to the dashboard. The notebook I'd been using to jot travel notes lay open. A single line filled the page, written over and over in my handwriting. "I'm still here." Over and over, dozens of times. When I looked back up, the passenger seat was empty. The air inside the van felt suddenly lighter, like something had lifted. Outside, the ridge shimmered in the soft dawn, that strange silver glow fading into pale sunlight. I turned the key. The van started easily this time. No hum, no whispers, just the sound of the engine and the faint rustle of wind in the trees. I drove toward the entrance, heart pounding. The wooden sign still hung crooked, its paint peeling. Echo Ridge RV Park, peaceful isolation. As I passed it, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The park was empty. No RVs, no lights, just an open field and the faint outline of the ridge behind it. The mist thinned, and for the first time in weeks, I saw the highway stretch wide and clear ahead. But even as I drove, part of me couldn't shake the feeling that something had come with me, a stillness, a weight that wasn't entirely mine. When I stopped for gas an hour later, I went inside to pay. The attendant was a young woman, maybe in her 20s, eyes tired but kind. She rang me up and smiled politely. "Where you headed?" she asked. "East," I said. "Just driving." She nodded, then looked down at the receipt. Her smile faded slightly. "Hey, weird question," she said. "You been through here before?" I shook my head. "First time." She turned the receipt toward me. Customer name Ethan Walsh. Date September 24th. The exact same date as the one from Echo Ridge. And under it, in faint red ink, 3 words, "Welcome back, Ethan." That's the thing about peace. Sometimes it isn't freedom. It's a loop. And if you're not careful, it'll wait for you to come back. So if you ever see that sign by the side of the highway, weathered wood, paint flaking, promising peaceful isolation, keep driving, no matter how tired you are, no matter how much you crave the quiet, because some places don't offer peace. They just take it from you and leave the echo behind. I've always believed the woods could tell when you were lying to yourself. Maybe that's why I kept coming back to them, because they never let me get away with it. My name's Eli Mercer, 52 years old, retired park ranger, 30 years walking ridgelines and counting fire rings, breaking up illegal camps, pulling lost hikers from ravines, and sometimes just sitting still enough to hear the forest breathe. When I left the job, I told everyone it was for the best, that I wanted peace, quiet, a slower life. But the truth was simpler and uglier. I didn't know who I was without the woods watching me. So I bought a used Volkswagen Westphalia, painted a dull pine green. It smelled faintly of mildew and old gasoline, but when I turned the key, the sound of the engine was the closest thing to a heartbeat I'd heard since retiring. I started driving south, through towns where no one remembered my name. By early autumn, I found myself in the southern Appalachians, somewhere between Boone and the Smokies, an old logging road, narrow enough that branches scraped the sides of the van like fingernails on tin. That's where I saw it, a small, forgotten pull-off by a mountain lake, fog hanging low like breath on glass. I don't think the spot was on any official map. The ground was flat, ringed with poplar and oak. The air smelled like wet stone and cedar. A heron stood motionless in the shallows, as if it had been waiting for me to arrive. That night, I parked the van facing the water and ran my portable generator, an old Yamaha I'd used for years as backup on fire watch posts. Reliable. Loud enough to remind you're not completely alone. I cooked beans and rice, read a little by lamplight, then shut things down around midnight. I was halfway between wake and sleep when I heard the first click. Soft, mechanical, like the shift of a relay. Then, silence. The generator died. I figured I'd overdrawn it, or maybe the plug shook loose. I grabbed a flashlight, stepped outside. The fog was thick enough to make the beam look solid, a white column tapering off into nothing. I could hear the lake lapping at the shore, slow, uneven, like something breathing. I knelt by the generator, checked the switch, the fuel line. Everything looked fine. I hit the starter. It coughed, sputtered, then came back to life. When I glanced at my watch, it read 3:15 a.m. The next night it happened again. Same time, same sound, same silence. That kind of repetition gets into your head. I told myself it was coincidence or some old wiring corroded by humidity. But the woods around that lake had a way of swallowing logic. During the day, everything looked normal. Sunlight dripping through leaves, dragonflies skimming the water. But the quiet underneath felt wrong. Birds called in short bursts, then went dead still, as if listening for something I couldn't hear. On the third night, I decided to stay awake. The fog rolled in early, thick enough to coat the van windows in dew. I sat by the table inside, the sound of the generator steady behind me, a comforting hum, rhythmic, almost hypnotic. Around 2, I made a note in my journal. Test voltage output in morning. Maybe overheating. I was trying to sound rational, even to myself. But I wasn't thinking about the generator anymore. I was thinking about the silence that followed it, how absolute it felt, like the world stopped breathing. At 3:14, the hum stuttered once. At 3:15, it died. The sudden absence of noise hit harder than I expected. My pulse quickened. I reached for the flashlight, stepped outside. The air was colder than before, sharp in the lungs. Fog clung to the trees, heavy and wet. Somewhere across the lake, something cracked, a branch or maybe a footstep, and then faded back into stillness. I squatted beside the generator again, clicked the switch. Nothing. No response. I tried to steady my breathing, leaned closer, and that's when I saw them. Handprints. Faint, smudged on the inside of the metal casing where the access panel opened. Small. Not child small, but narrower than mine. Too clean to be oil marks, too fresh to be old. I touched one with my fingertip. It felt cool, damp, as if someone had pressed their hand there seconds before. I stood up fast, scanning the tree line. My flashlight beam caught only fog, pale and shifting. No movement, no sound, just the hiss of the lake against the mud. For a moment, I thought about calling out. Anyone there? But years in the ranger service had taught me something most campers never learn. If you think you're being watched in the woods, you probably are, and talking only tells them where you are. So I went back inside the van, locked the doors, and waited. Morning came gray and brittle. I hadn't slept. When I stepped outside, the fog was lifting, and the lake looked calm again, reflecting the dull sky. I walked to the generator, opened the casing. No prints, no moisture, no sign of tampering. It was as if the night had wiped itself clean. I packed up my gear, drove into town to refuel and restock. There was a general store, wood-paneled, the kind that sold bait, jerky, and cigarettes behind the counter. The man working there looked to be around my age, maybe older, with a beard gone silver. His name tag said, Harlan. "Campin' up by the lake road?" he asked as he filled my thermos from the pot behind the counter. I nodded. "Yeah. Didn't see any other rigs out there." He chuckled. "Ain't many do. That lake's got stories." "What kind of stories?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "The kind that keep people on the main road," he said, half smiling. "Back in the 60s, a storm washed out part of the old camp. Folks used to say you could still hear the generators running at night, even after the rangers packed up. Power companies swore they cut the lines. Some say it was methane in the water or pressure changes." He puthered, lowering his voice a little. "Say the lake don't like engines." I smiled, polite but skeptical. "I used to be a ranger, seen a lot of what people call hauntings. Most of it's noise and nerves." He nodded slowly. "Sure. But sometimes nerves are how the woods tell you something ain't right." That line stuck with me. When I drove back to camp that evening, I couldn't shake the way he said it. Like it wasn't advice, more like a warning he'd given before too many times. That night, I parked the van in the same spot. I thought about moving, just to prove to myself I wasn't running from shadows. but a part of me needed to know, needed to see if it would happen again. Around 11, I turned on the generator, poured myself a drink, and sat by the window. The fog was already crawling in over the water, thicker than before, swirling in slow motion. My own reflection ghosted across the glass, pale, tired, older than I remembered. The hum of the generator filled the silence like a heartbeat again. I realized I'd started timing my own breathing to it, the steady pulse, the soft vibration underfoot. It had become my proof that I wasn't alone, that I still had control. But when the watch face glowed 3:14, my chest tightened. I found myself whispering, "Don't you dare," as if the machine could hear me. Then, right on cue, the click, the silence, and that suffocating stillness like a hand over my mouth. The moment the generator died, it was as if the world forgot how to make sound. No wind, no crickets, no drip from the branches above, just that awful stillness. I sat frozen inside the van, staring through the condensation on the window. My reflection stared back at me, its outline twitching with every shallow breath I took. The fog pressed closer against the glass, thick and white, like it was alive and curious. I waited, 1 minute, then 2, hoping the sound would come back, that the machine would cough to life again. But the silence stretched, heavy enough to feel like pressure in my ears. Finally, I opened the door. The cold hit me first, dense, wet, almost metallic. My flashlight cut through the mist, catching only fragments of trees and the silver edge of the lake. I could hear my heartbeat again, thudding loud in my chest, and for a moment I wondered if that was what had scared the woods away, the reminder that something was still alive in all that stillness. I stepped down into the mud, boots sinking slightly. The beam of light wavered as I moved toward the generator. It sat just where I'd left it, squat and red and ordinary, except for the way it seemed too quiet, like a body after the last breath. I knelt beside it, put a hand on the casing, cold, damp, no vibration. When I unlatched the panel, my throat tightened. There they were again, handprints, clear this time, unmistakable, the same shape, same size. But there were more of them now. 4, 5. Too many to explain away, each one pressed from the inside of the metal, the impressions slightly raised as if the sheet had flexed under pressure. My first thought wasn't ghosts or spirits, it was people. Someone had tampered with it. Maybe someone was out here, messing with me, trying to scare me off. But that theory fell apart as fast as it formed. There were no footprints in the mud except mine. No trail, no sound of retreating steps. Whoever or whatever had done it, they hadn't come or gone by land. The lake, though, it was black glass now, stiller than I'd ever seen water. The fog hovered an inch above it, unmoving, as though held in place by something invisible. I could just make out the reflection end's taillights in the surface, twin red eyes floating on nothing. Nothing. I turned back toward the van, and that's when I saw it. A shape, faint and low to the ground, on the far side of the fog, maybe 20 feet away. It wasn't moving, but it was there. My light caught a glimpse of something pale, a curve of shoulder, a hint of texture like wet cloth. "Hello?" I said before I could stop myself. No answer. The shape didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even seem to breathe. I took 1 step forward, and it dissolved. Not vanished like something running, but gone like smoke folding into air. The flashlight beam hit empty space. I stayed out there for maybe another minute, scanning the trees before I realized my hands were shaking. My training kicked in. The rational part of me that had dealt with night terrors on patrol, with hallucinations from exhaustion, with scared campers seeing faces in the dark. It's the fog. It's your eyes. It's exhaustion. That's all. I repeated that until I believed it enough to move again. When I started the generator this time, it roared to life instantly, almost eagerly. The noise felt like oxygen. I went back inside, locked the door, and left every light on until dawn. By morning, I had a plan. I'd test the machine in daylight, disassemble it, clean the components, prove to myself it was mechanical failure, nothing more. I'd been a ranger long enough to know how the mind plays tricks after too much isolation. Fear can grow like mold if you leave it in the dark too long. But when I knelt by the generator under the pale daylight, everything was pristine. No prints, no distortion in the casing. Even the inside looked cleaner than before. I checked the plug, the fuel line, the grounding wire, all perfect. It was impossible, and that made it worse. The rest of the day passed in strange quiet. I kept busy, fishing, hiking the edge of the lake, but no matter where I went, I felt watched. Sometimes I'd catch a flicker of motion through the fog and convince myself it was an animal. Other times I'd smell something faint and unfamiliar. Not rot, but something sour, electric, like ozone after lightning. I started thinking about Harlan's words in the general store. Sometimes nerves are how the woods tell you something ain't right. He hadn't said your nerves. He'd said the woods. That night, I almost didn't start the generator. I told myself I didn't need it. The van battery could power my lamp, and I could get some rest before heading out in the morning. But avoidance never solved anything. I'd lived too long teaching people not to let fear run their choices. So at 10:45, I went out and started it again. The hum filled the air, steady and reassuring. I wrote in my journal, 3:15, check again. Prove it to yourself. You've got control. Then I waited. When the time came, I didn't look at the watch. I didn't need to. The sound faltered like clockwork. A hiccup, a click, a breath held too long. Then silence. But this time, I didn't freeze. I grabbed the flashlight, stepped outside fast before my nerves could stop me. The fog was lighter tonight, the moon pushing through in faint streaks. The generator sat there again, dead quiet, but I noticed something new. The ground beneath it was dry, perfectly dry, even though everything else glistened with dew. I crouched, shining the beam around the base. There, in the dirt, faint lines. Not footprints exactly, but drag marks. Something had been pulled or pushed from the woods toward the generator. The marks were uneven, shallow at first, then deeper near the end, like weight had been added. My first instinct was human. Someone's been sneaking around. Maybe a squatter or a poacher, maybe worse. But the drag marks didn't lead away. They stopped right at the generator and disappeared, as if whatever made them had gone inside. That thought made me back up fast. My flashlight trembled as I scanned the tree line again. The fog had thickened, swirling at knee height as though something was moving just beneath it. My pulse thundered in my ears. Then, a sound, soft, metallic, from inside the generator, a scrape, then another, then a slow, deliberate knock. I stumbled backward, almost tripping over my own feet. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I couldn't. The part of me that had spent 30 years in these woods, the rational, trained, disciplined part, needed to know. I forced myself closer. The sound stopped when I did. I put my hand on the metal casing and felt it. A faint vibration, but not from the motor. It was pulsing irregularly, like something alive was moving inside. I yanked the panel open. Empty. No prints, no movement, no explanation. Just that same damp metal smell and my own reflection in the smooth surface. That's when I realized something else. The reflection was wrong. My flashlight was in my right hand, but in the reflection, it was in my left. I blinked, looked again. My hand shook, and the reflection shook too. But a half second later, as if it were lagging behind, the air around me felt thicker suddenly, charged. I stepped back, keeping my light on the casing. The reflection steadied, then seemed to tilt its head slightly, a movement I hadn't made. That broke me. I slammed the panel shut, stumbled backward, and ran for the van. My breath came out ragged, visible in the cold air. Behind me, the generator stayed silent. No flicker, no hum, just waiting. Back inside the van, I locked the doors again. My reflection in the window looked hollow, pale. I sat there until sunrise, clutching the flashlight like a weapon. When the first light hit the fog, it felt like the world started breathing again. I told myself I'd leave that morning, head for the main road, drive until I saw power lines and people. But when I stepped outside, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. The generator was gone. The ground where it had sat was bare. The grass flattened, drag marks leading straight down toward the lake. I followed them, slowly, carefully, until they vanished into the water. The surface rippled once, then went perfectly still. And there, floating just at the edge of the shallows, was a single metal latch, the same kind that held the generator casing shut. It bobbed once, then sank. For a long time, I just stood there, staring at the spot where the generator had been. You tell yourself you'll act rationally when something strange happens, that training or age or experience will keep your nerves in check. But when the ground itself starts rewriting what you thought was true, all those years of logic feel like sand. The drag marks cut a shallow trail through the grass down to the water's edge. The mud was churned in places, not deep, but deliberate. The pattern looked almost careful, like someone or something had placed the weight each time, step by step, making sure I'd see it come morning. I crouched by the lake, scanning the water. The surface was smooth again, calm in a way that didn't feel natural. The fog still hung close, whispering over the water in thin sheets. Nothing floated, no sound, no birds, not even a mosquito. The quiet pressed so hard I could hear the blood moving in my ears. "Enough," I whispered. I think I said it to the air, but it felt like I was saying it to myself. I was done chasing phantoms. I went back to the van, grabbed the crowbar from the rear storage, and marched straight into that cold water. The first step sent a shock up my spine. The second took my breath. By the third, the water was up to my knees, and the fog swallowed my lower half like a curtain. I swung the crowbar through the shallows, stirring silt and weed. Nothing. I waded deeper, the lake bed soft beneath my boots, tugging at me like something reluctant to let go. Then, a clank. Metal against metal. Faint but real. I froze. The water rippled out in small rings. Another clank, closer this time, just under the surface. I knelt, reached down. My fingers brushed something hard, smooth, familiar. I gripped and pulled. The latch. It came up easy, the same one I'd seen floating, but attached to it for just a moment was a thin length of wire stretching down into the dark. Then it snapped, vanishing into blackness below. I stood there shivering, the latch in my hand. Cold water dripped from my sleeves. Somewhere deep beneath me, something gave a faint thunk, like metal shifting. Then the ripples faded again, and all that remained was my reflection, fractured by the surface. When I got back to shore, I felt hollow. Not scared anymore, just emptied. There's a kind of fear that burns itself out, leaving only clarity behind. I knew, with complete certainty, that whatever was happening, it wasn't about ghosts or tricks. It was about me, about what I'd brought with me into these woods. I sat on the bumper of the van until my clothes dried stiff. The fog thinned by mid-morning, revealing a perfect stillness, the kind that makes you forget what sound ever was. I left the lake that afternoon. Didn't even pack properly. Just tossed my things into the van and turned the key. The engine caught after a few stubborn seconds, coughing through the silence. I drove without music, without windows open, just the dull hum of tires on gravel. When I hit the main road, the fog broke apart behind me like a memory I wasn't sure had been real. By the time I reached Harlan's general store, it was near dusk. He was out front smoking, the orange tip of his cigarette glowing in the gray light. I pulled in, stepped out, probably looking like I'd seen a ghost, though that wasn't quite the word for it. He looked at me for a long moment before speaking. "Left the lake, huh?" "Yeah," I said quietly. "Lost a generator." He nodded once. "They take things sometimes." I asked. My voice cracked on the word. Harlan exhaled smoke through his nose. "Not people, not ghosts either, just the woods. You stay long enough out here, they notice you. Some spots don't like company." I leaned against the hood, staring at the road stretching west. "It's not haunted," I said finally. "It's just empty, too empty. You can start to hear yourself thinking." He flicked the cigarette away. "That's usually when folks start to run." "I didn't run," I said. He smiled faintly. "Then you learned something most don't." I didn't answer. I got back in the van and he gave me a slow nod before I drove off, the kind of nod people give when they know you've seen something you won't ever fully explain. I didn't go far that night. Found a rest stop off the highway, one of those places with motion lights and vending machines. The noise of the trucks idling nearby felt comforting, like proof that the world was still moving, still making noise. I sat in the back of the van with my journal, staring at the blank page. My hands smelled faintly of lake water and metal. I wrote, October 17, generator lost, lake quiet, everything fine. Still here. Then I stopped, because it wasn't fine. I wasn't fine. It wasn't about the generator anymore. It was about the silence that came with it, that hollow 3:15 a.m. silence that waited for me to listen. And I had, too closely. I thought about those handprints on the inside of the casing. I kept asking myself, what if they weren't someone else's? What if they were mine? What if I'd pressed them there in some moment I didn't remember, reaching into the machine trying to hold on to the hum that kept me from hearing my own thoughts? I'd spent 30 years living with noise, engines, radios, chatter from the Ranger Tower, and then in retirement I'd told myself I wanted silence, peace. But maybe what I really wanted was proof that something out there still answered back, that I hadn't become invisible. The woods had given me exactly what I asked for, complete silence, and I finally understood what that meant. It meant you're alone with everything you've been avoiding. I stayed on the road after that. Drove through Tennessee, then north again. Sometimes I'd camp by rivers, sometimes behind gas stations, but I never went back to that lake, not because I was scared of what was in it, but because I knew what it would show me if I looked long enough. Now, whenever I camp near water, I still bring a generator, a new one, quieter, more efficient. But every night before I turn it on, I find myself glancing at my watch, 3:15. That number burned itself into my brain. Sometimes I wake up just before it, heart racing, half expecting to hear that familiar click, that soft surrender of sound. I never do. But I still listen. I've learned something out here, something I wish I'd understood years ago. Silence isn't peace. It's a mirror. And the longer you stare into it, the more it starts to stare back. So now when people ask me why I still camp alone, I tell them this. Because fear isn't in the woods. It's in the space we refuse to fill with truth. That lake, whatever it was, didn't take my generator. It took my illusion that solitude was the same as safety. And every time the night grows still, every time the fog rolls in thick and the hum of my machine falters, I remind myself, trust your instincts. Peace can hide danger. And sometimes when the world goes quiet, it's not waiting for you to listen. It's waiting for you to remember. I used to think the quietest places were the safest. Maybe that's something you only learn to unlearn after a lifetime of believing it. My name's Martin Clay, 62 years old. I retired from teaching high school history a few years back, traded the classroom for open roads, and my wife Elaine and I have spent the better part of this past year exploring what's left of the forgotten spine of the Appalachians. We drive a worn but well-kept 94 Volkswagen Eurovan, pale blue, with cabinets that still smell faintly of cedar, and a dashboard that hums softly even when the engine's off. We'd made a kind of ritual of it, finding small campgrounds tucked behind forest roads, places without cell signal, without chatter. Elaine said that the silence between mountain folds felt like prayer. I agreed. I still do, mostly. But there's a kind of silence that doesn't bless. It watches. And that's what I met that October. It was late in the season, the air dry and thin, the leaves burned to copper and russet. We'd been tracing the Blue Ridge Parkway southward, watching fog rise like smoke from the valleys every morning. That night, though, the fog didn't rise. It came down. It spilled over the ridges as if it were being poured, thick as breath, swallowing the trees one by one until all we could see were the beams of our lanterns floating in milky gray. We'd parked at a small, unmarked pull-off just off Route 221, not far from an old ranger station that had long since been turned into a seasonal maintenance shed. A man at the last town we passed through, Boone maybe, told us that the site was quiet, safe for folks like you. I remember the way he said folks like you, like he meant something more than just two older travelers. Maybe he meant harmless, or maybe he meant naive. Elaine was inside the van, tidying up the small galley, humming softly. I stood outside with my thermos, staring into the fog where the forest should have been. The cicadas had gone silent early that evening, the way they sometimes do before a cold snap. All that was left was the low drip of condensation from the trees and the occasional distant creak. Wood shifting, or maybe something heavier moving unseen. "Looks like we'll have to stay put tonight," Elaine called. "Wouldn't see 10 feet ahead if we drove," I answered. We settled in early, but around 10, the quiet began to feel heavier than usual. The fog didn't move like fog anymore. It pressed. I could feel the air thicken through the cracks in the window seals. Every sound felt muffled, padded, like we were sitting inside cotton. Elaine had fallen asleep, book open across her lap. I turned down the lantern to a dim orange glow and sat there listening. That's when I heard it. It started as what I thought was wind, a low moan threading through the trees, but it was too rhythmic, too intentional. Then came a voice, a man's voice, faint but clear, calling through the fog. "Hey, you folks out here?" I sat up. It was close enough to sound human, but distant enough to feel unreal. Elaine stirred. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. She blinked. "Someone calling?" The voice came again, sharper this time. "Campers, you all need to move. This area is not safe." My first thought was a park ranger, maybe doing late rounds, maybe there'd been a warning we missed. I unlatched the sliding door and stepped out into the cold air. The fog hit me like wet wool, instantly swallowing everything beyond the van's headlights. "Hello?" I called. "We're here." "Who's that?" No answer for a few seconds, just the slow hiss of mist. Then, "Road's closed ahead. Landslide took half the ridge. You'll need to follow my light. I'll get you to the safe road." His voice seemed to come from just beyond where my flashlight beam ended, maybe 20, 30 feet out. I couldn't see a thing, but I could almost feel him there. Elaine had climbed to the door, rubbing her arms. "What's going on?" "Said there's been a slide," I told her. "He's going to guide us back." Something about her face, the way she looked out into the fog, made me pause. "You see a light?" she asked. I didn't. Not yet. Then, as if on cue, a small amber glow flickered deep in the haze. It moved side to side, slow, steady, like someone walking with a lantern. "See?" I said, relief and caution tangling in my throat. Elaine frowned. "Martin, there hasn't been any ranger activity up here in weeks. They told us that in Asheville." "Maybe seasonal staff?" I said too quickly. I wanted to believe it. It was cold, visibility near zero. Logic was my only comfort. We packed what little was out, folding chairs, thermos, lantern. Elaine slipped into her coat and boots, still unconvinced. The light ahead bobbed again. I could hear the voice clearer now, though not its words, just a low call, spaced evenly like instructions. When I started the van, the headlights only deepened the fog's density. The world turned white. The amber light ahead was our only guide, drifting slow enough for us to follow. Elaine kept glancing at me, her mouth tight. "Maybe he's leading us down to the station," I said. But even as I said it, something gnawed at the edge of my gut. The road beneath us began to narrow, the gravel giving way to cracked pavement. I'd driven enough back roads to know when a path was wrong. The fog reflected our headlights back in a flat, ghostly glare. "Martin," Elaine said softly, "we're going uphill." She was right. We should have been descending toward the highway, not climbing. But the voice, faint, urgent now, called again. "Keep going. You're close." "Close to what?" The van crawled forward. My palms were damp against the wheel. The fog pressed closer, almost tactile, brushing the windshield like breath. I could feel the road leaning slightly left, then right, twisting like a spine. Elaine's hand clamped on my arm. "Stop, Martin, stop!" I braked. "What? Listen." Silence. The voice was gone. So was the light. The fog shifted again, slower this time, as if it were breathing around us. I turned off the engine, and for the first time that night, I felt true darkness, a black so deep it erased every shape. "Maybe he went ahead," I said, but my voice cracked in the middle. Elaine opened her door before I could stop her, flashlight in hand. The beam caught only gray. Then, a glint, something reflective. I followed her gaze, stepping out beside her. We walked maybe 10 feet forward, the van's glow shrinking behind us. The air felt colder, sharper. Then the beam caught the edge of something metallic, a sign, bent backward. I brushed away moisture with my sleeve and read the words, "Road closed. Landslide area. Do not enter." Elaine exhaled shakily. "Martin, we were driving right into it." And there it was, the faintest echo from somewhere below us, so deep it could have been imagination. A man's voice, still calling. But it wasn't above us anymore. It was down there. I took a slow step back. My heels slipped slightly, gravel rolling underfoot. Elaine caught my hand, eyes wide but unreadable. We didn't speak. We just backed up until the van's headlights found us again, until there was something solid behind us that felt like safety. We didn't drive again that night. We just sat inside the van, doors locked, fog pressing against the glass like a living thing. Every now and then a sound drifted through. Not quite human, not quite wind. Sometimes it sounded like words, sometimes like breathing. And as the hours dragged toward dawn, I started to realize the danger out there wasn't the fog. It was the way it made me doubt what I knew to be real. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. You'd think exhaustion would have forced my body to surrender, but fear works differently at this age. It's quieter. It doesn't rush through you. It seeps in, drip by drip, until your thoughts don't feel like your own anymore. Elaine sat upright most of the night, her blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders. I could see her reflection in the windshield, her eyes fixed somewhere past the glass, as if watching something I couldn't see. I wanted to ask what she was thinking, but I already knew. She was wondering if the voice we'd heard had ever belonged to anyone at all. Every so often, a faint click would echo outside, like stones knocking together. Once I heard something heavier drag across the ground. My hand hovered near the door handle each time, torn between checking and staying absolutely still. In the end, I stayed still. You tell yourself that stillness means safety, but that's a lie. Sometimes stillness just means surrender. When dawn finally came, it didn't bring light, just a thinner shade of gray. The fog hadn't lifted, only loosened its grip. The van's windows were beaded with moisture, the glass cold enough to cloud my breath. Elaine finally broke the silence. "We should go check the road," she said quietly. "If there's a drop-off, I want to see it in daylight." Part of me wanted to drive away immediately, pretend the night had been nothing but nerves. But another part, the stubborn, rational part, needed proof. Needed to know that I hadn't imagined the voice, or worse, followed something that never existed. We stepped out, flashlights off, trusting the pale morning to guide us. The world was damp and muted. Even the birds hadn't started calling yet. I could smell the earth, heavy and metallic. The road curved gently ahead, disappearing into fog like it had the night before. I walked slowly, counting steps, listening for the crunch of gravel. My boots slipped once on wet leaves, the sound unnaturally loud in the hush. Then, without warning, the ground just stopped. It wasn't a clean cliff, more like a wound in the earth. The pavement ended abruptly, giving way to broken dirt and shattered rock, sloping down into a chaotic drop. I could see tree trunks splintered and half buried below, the remnants of a landslide that must have torn through months ago. Elaine stood beside me, breathing shallow. We were 30 feet from driving over that. I nodded slowly, my throat dry. Something about that edge unsettled me more than the voice itself. Maybe because it made everything too real. Whatever had called us forward had known exactly where to lead us, to that point. As we turned back toward the van, I noticed something glinting in the mud near the roadside. I knelt and brushed it off, a piece of glass, rounded, attached to a small metal frame. It took me a second to recognize what it was, the lens from a flashlight or lantern, shattered. I showed Elaine. "Could have been left by a ranger," I said. She shook her head slowly. "Then why didn't we see his truck? Why didn't he come closer?" I didn't have an answer. We packed up in silence and started the drive downhill, following what was left of the old road until we hit a fork marked by a rusted gate. The sign read, "Maintenance access, authorized vehicles only." Beyond it stood the ranger station, a squat, weathered cabin with a green tin roof. A white government pickup sat parked beside it. The engine was off, but the driver's door was open. A man in uniform leaned against the railing of the porch, clipboard in hand. He looked up as we pulled in. "Morning," he said, voice even, friendly enough. "Didn't expect visitors this early." I got out, legs stiff. "We camped up the ridge last night," I said. "Heard there'd been a slide. Someone told us to move." He frowned. "Slide?" "Yeah. A ranger came through, said we needed to follow him to safety." The man's expression shifted. Not disbelief, exactly, but something close to concern. "Sir, that section's been closed since last winter. We haven't had anyone patrolling up there in months." Elaine stepped forward. "We saw a light," she said quietly. "Amber, like a lantern." The ranger set down his clipboard. "Could have been a poacher, maybe, or someone trespassing." He scratched at his chin. "But if he told you to drive that way—" His voice trailed off. He didn't finish the sentence, but I could feel what he meant. He offered to radio it in, maybe send someone to take a look. While he stepped inside the cabin, Elaine and I stood near the van, neither of us speaking. The fog was finally beginning to thin, peeling back from the trees to reveal the rolling hills. From this vantage, I could see the ridge we'd been on the night before, a narrow scar cutting across it, ending at that gash in the earth. I thought of the voice again, its tone. It hadn't sounded malicious. It had sounded helpful. Calm, reassuring, like someone trying to save us from danger. When the ranger returned, he told us they'd check the area later that day, but we were free to move on. I thanked him, but as I turned to go, something on the cabin wall caught my attention. A framed photo, sun-bleached, showing 3 rangers standing in front of that very porch. The middle one, a tall man with an easy smile, looked almost exactly how I'd pictured the voice might belong to him. I leaned closer to read the small brass plate beneath it. "In memory of Ranger Samuel Pritchard, 1967 to 2023. My stomach dropped. The ranger noticed my pause. "Sam was one of the good ones," he said softly. "We lost him last November. Landslide caught his truck near that same ridge." Elaine touched my arm, gently pulling me away from the photo. The ranger didn't notice the way my hand trembled. We drove in silence for nearly an hour before either of us spoke. The road wound through dense hardwood forest, the fog finally breaking into patches of sunlight. It should have felt peaceful, like waking up from a nightmare, but it didn't. Elaine finally said, "Do you think he was trying to warn us?" Or... She didn't finish the question. I didn't answer it. That night, we found another campground near a river crossing. The fog didn't follow us there, but its absence felt strange, like something missing rather than something gone. The silence of the woods pressed differently now, heavier. As we unpacked, Elaine took out her small journal and began to write. She's done that since our first trip, just quick notes, impressions of the places we visit. But that night, her pen barely moved. After a while, she closed the book and said, "Let's not camp in the mountains again for a while." I agreed without thinking. Later, after she'd fallen asleep, I sat outside the van with the lantern low, listening to the river's constant rush. The sound should have been comforting, but every now and then I'd catch another note beneath it. Faint, like someone calling across a distance. Maybe it was an echo, a trick of the valley, or maybe echoes are just memories that refuse to fade. I thought about the road, the broken glass, the voice that had led us so close to the edge. If it had wanted to harm us, it could have, but it didn't. It led us to the brink and then stopped, like someone who'd seen the fall once before and didn't want us to make the same mistake. That's the thought I hold on to, the one that lets me sleep. Even now, when fog curls low across the hills and the woods go quiet, I find myself listening, not with fear, but with a kind of reverence, because sometimes what speaks from the fog isn't there to scare you. Sometimes it's there to remind you to stop before you go too far. We kept moving after that, but the road didn't feel the same. It's strange how one night can bend the shape of all the nights that follow, how a single wrong turn, a single voice in the dark, can live inside your head like static you can't quite tune out. Elaine and I spent the next few weeks tracing flatter routes, staying near rivers and plains where you can see the horizon stretch wide and open. But even there, when dusk rolled in and the air cooled, I'd catch myself glancing toward the tree line, half expecting to see a soft amber glow bobbing between the trunks. I didn't tell Elaine that. She was quieter these days. She'd stopped humming when she cooked, stopped journaling after dark. There was a weight in her silence that I didn't know how to lift. Maybe it was guilt for trusting the voice too long. Or maybe it was something deeper, a realization that no matter how old we get, we're never immune to fear. One morning, near a place called Maple Run, we stopped at a diner that doubled as a supply store. The owner, a woman with gray braids and an accent from somewhere deep in the hills, noticed our van and smiled. "You folks been up near Crag Hollow recently?" she asked. Elaine and I exchanged a glance. "Why?" I said carefully. She wiped her hands on her apron. "Heard some hikers talking about lights in the fog again. Folks think it's the rangers doing night checks, but that road's been closed since the slide last year. Strange, though. They say the light always stops right before the drop." Elaine stared at her coffee. I managed a small nod, pretending it was news to me. But inside, I felt something shift. Not fear this time, but an odd, hollow sympathy. We paid and left. On the way out of town, Elaine said quietly, "Maybe he's still trying to keep people safe." I wanted to agree, but something about that thought unsettled me more than comforted me. Because if the voice was still out there, then maybe some part of it, of him, was still trapped in that fog, repeating the same warning again and again, never realizing that he didn't survive the first time. We drove on in silence, the tires humming against the road, the mountains fading behind us like an old photograph. That night, we found a small RV park just outside the Shenandoah Valley. Nothing special. A handful of rigs spaced around a gravel loop, a picnic area, and a creek that murmured softly nearby. It was safe. Predictable. That's what we thought we needed. But safety, I've learned, can sometimes feel like a cage when you've already glimpsed the edge of the unknown. After dinner, Elaine went to shower in the park's restroom building, and I stayed behind to tidy up the van. The fog was light that night, thin ribbons drifting across the creek, harmless at first. I remember thinking how beautiful it looked under the lamplight. Then, somewhere in the distance, I heard it again. Not a voice. Not this time. A click. 2 stones knocking together. Slow. Deliberate. It came from the woods beyond the fence. Then silence. Then another click. Closer. I froze, listening. My pulse drummed in my ears. Logic tried to step in. Just animals, just branches. But there was rhythm to it, a pause and repeat, like someone signaling. I turned off the lantern inside the van, letting my eyes adjust. The fog thickened slightly, hanging low over the creek. And then I saw it, faint, almost imperceptible, a small shifting glow between the trees. Amber, slow, familiar. I stepped out of the van, heart pounding, boots crunching on gravel. "Hello?" I called. The sound bounced back, muffled. The light flickered once, then twice, as if answering. My throat went dry. "Sam?" I said, without meaning to. The light steadied, then faded, like a breath exhaled. When Elaine came back, towel over her shoulder, she found me still standing outside. She looked from me to the tree line. "You saw it again, didn't you?" I didn't answer. She just nodded, as if she'd expected that. "Then maybe it's not done with us," she said softly. That night, we slept with the curtains drawn tight. I dreamt of fog, endless, rolling, alive, and the sound of a man's voice echoing faintly through it. Not a warning this time. Just a whisper. You stopped in time. When I woke, the world was clear again. Morning sun broke through the trees, gold and gentle. For the first time in weeks, Elaine was smiling faintly as she made coffee. We didn't talk about the light again after that. We didn't need to. Something in both of us understood that not every question deserves an answer. Some things are meant to be carried, not solved. But that experience left me with one lesson. The kind that doesn't fade, even as years blur together. You see, fear doesn't always come to harm you. Sometimes it's the only thing keeping you alive. That night in the fog, when I heard that voice calling us forward, I wanted to believe it because it sounded kind, because it sounded human. I ignored the quiet pulse of instinct whispering, "Something's wrong." I let comfort disguise itself as guidance, and if not for Elaine, if not for her stillness, her unwillingness to move one more foot, I wouldn't be here to tell you this. It's humbling, realizing that after decades of experience, after a lifetime of reason and caution, all it takes is one moment of misplaced trust to walk straight toward your own edge. Now, when I travel, I listen differently. Not just to what's said, but to what silence tries to say in between. Because silence has its own language. It warns, it questions, it remembers. Every so often on cool mornings when fog rolls low across the road, I pull the van over and just watch. The mist curls and breathes, reshaping the world for a few brief minutes before sunlight dissolves it. And in those moments, I swear I can almost hear it, a faint echo, distant but kind, reminding me to slow down, to pay attention, to trust that uneasy feeling instead of fighting it. Maybe that's the real haunting, not the voices we hear, but the instincts we silence. Elaine and I don't chase the mountains anymore. We spend more time near the coast now, where fog comes soft and harmless, where the horizon doesn't vanish without warning. But sometimes, when she catches me staring at the sea, she'll squeeze my hand and whisper, "You're thinking about him again." And I'll nod, because I am. I think about that voice, calm, patient, doomed to repeat its warning forever in the fog, and I wonder if maybe that's what we all become in the end. Echoes of our own choices, trying to guide someone else before they make the same mistake. If that's true, then I hope my echo says something simple, something like this: don't let comfort blind you. Don't follow every light you see. And when the world goes quiet enough to hear your own doubt, listen. Because sometimes that's not fear talking, it's survival trying to reach you. And the next time you're parked out there, deep in the mountains, the fog curling against your windshield, the night pressing so close you can hear your heartbeat. Remember this: not every voice in the fog wants to lead you astray, but not everyone wants to save you either. You have to decide which is which, before the edge finds you first.